we have scared people too much without giving them methods of remedy. We have not shown that there's a path forward, that they have any agency. And that's what leads to this kind of nihilistic viewpoint of like, well, it's all screwed anyway, so who cares? Set the house on fire.
Are we being too pessimistic about AI? This is The Rip Current. I'm Jake Ward. We look at the big invisible forces that are controlling us every day. And as you probably know, if you've been listening to this show, I am deeply pessimistic about AI. I'm a professional pessimist about it. And so this week's guest asked me this question, and it really got me right between the eyes. Dr. Rumman Chowdhury is a longtime maker of AI and ethicist thinking about its implications. She worked at Accenture. She worked at Twitter right before Elon Musk took over building AI systems there, and then went on to be a science envoy for the Biden administration, now runs a nonprofit called Humane Intelligence, which thinks about this problem. And she basically says over the course of this conversation that being as pessimistic as we have been may be a mistake. It may, in fact, be handing power to these companies that already enjoy the resources of nation states, already have insulated themselves against democratic norms. Maybe we're somehow playing into their hands by being as fatalistic as we are about this stuff. And I say this again as someone who is, I can ruin any party ranting about AI. So I really found this very thought-provoking. We covered that. We covered the issues of bias, which she uncovered early on in the world of transformer models and LLMs, and what we can expect from the future, what the most effective ways might be of regaining control of a technology that should, in theory, because it is perpetrated on all of us, should belong to all of us. So I hope you enjoy this hour-long conversation with Dr. Rumman Chowdhury. So let's start with your biography. One thing that jumped out at me about your background is that where a lot of AI people come from a straight CS, computer science background, you have a PhD in political science, which makes you kind of a weirdo in this world, I have to say. And I really like that. And I'm really curious to know a little bit about what in your political science PhD would you recommend to all people in this world right now? You know what I mean? Like, what did it prepare you for in the role that you now play?
Yeah, I'll make it even weirder. I also went to MIT for my undergrad and majored in political science, management science, and econ.
I saw that.
Make that make sense.
I know,
right?
You don't like to click right in with the expected thing, it seems to me.
With just
That's
a
funny.
programming. Well, even before AI was a thing, I also had contacts. I actually went to MIT during the first .com bubble, so that was really interesting. So many of my peers were not only the first hires at some of the backbone companies, like the companies that are old and boring, they were some of the first hires at those companies. But they also had startups, et cetera. And, while it was a really exciting time to be not only in tech, but like basically in one of the schools where all of that comes from, one thing that I thought was missing at the time was just having context around the data and the numbers. So I always like to say I like math with context. And that's really how I came into quantitative social science. So I came into political science because quantitative social sciences are a field in which we take data and numbers and we actually analyze them in context of real world issues. It is also kind of funny, of the things I learned, one thing I will say is certainly MIT and, a lot of better schools teach you how to think, not what to think. And that's probably the most important thing I learned. But also by the time I was in my PhD program, I had already taken a lot of stats programming classes, math classes, game theory, et cetera, and actually delved into political philosophy, which I was awful at. I was purely a quantitative mindset. I'd only approached questions from a pure analytical, mathematically analytical perspective. And it was really hard for me to learn political philosophy, but I'm glad I did. I'm glad I struggled through it, because what I realized is political philosophy teaches you how to frame the question. And my analytics background taught me how to find the answer.
That's really interesting. You know what this makes me think of? I've told this story on this podcast before, but I was in a panel once, or it was what am I trying to say? It was a academic gathering and an industry gathering. So on one side of the table were a bunch of academics, political scientists, sociologists, psychologists. And on the other side of the table were a bunch of the sort of original nascent people that have now gone on to these big foundational companies. And one of them was giving this presentation on what they thought would be a way of sort of creating an ethical piece of AI. And they said, what we'll do is we'll have, 10,000 unfinished sentences, things like, it would be blank for me to blank with my coworker. And then we'll have enough humans fill it in that they will, this is like transformer models had just started. So they were just starting to play around with this stuff. And they were
Sounds like early RLHF, basically.
yeah, right. What is RLA? To define that for people.
Reinforcement learning with human feedback. So that's
Right,
how, yeah. So it's like you get people to vote up and vote down
right.
an answer, like two possible answers, and then there's a model trained on all the right answers.
Exactly.
But I think
So in
this
this,
sounds like early days of that.
well, and this is the thing. They got to, this guy got to the end of the presentation. He's like, and so by doing that and having enough people do the reinforcement learning, then we will arrive at a set of universal human values.
Oh no.
And now I will take your questions. And every hand in the room goes up, right? And the political scientist who called the meeting, who put this whole thing together, went first, and she said, "I have three questions: what is universal? What is human? And what are values?"
Can I tell you?
And then everybody fell out amongst themselves, and the meeting imploded.
Yeah.
It was a nightmare.
That's why I said, "Oh no," when you said that.
Nobody could talk to each other in that room. And
No,
I remember, and those
yeah.
people like now run the show. Those people are now on to,
Yeah. Well, I'm unsurprised because I literally got into discussion with people at one of these companies 3 months ago where so I'm on an advisory group for one of these companies whose name I cannot disclose, and they were presenting about how they're going to make politically neutral algorithms, and I must have ranted for about 25 minutes
good for
straight.
them. Wow.
I'm like, my entire field exists because we can't figure out what that means, right? Like, like you can be centrist, you can have a broad range of responses, all of which are actually pegged to what the existing like window of acceptable behavior is, which shifts over time. But what you cannot do is find a universal set of completely neutral answers that everybody can agree upon. Like it's just absolutely bizarre. But actually there's now a paper which is actually a good paper out of Stanford because, well, it's like both good and bad because it starts off by saying there's no such thing as political neutrality, which is great. And then it goes, but if you were to try to do it, here's how we might suggest you do it. And I'm like, that's when you face palm. That's when you face palm.
This is the thing, right? Is you have, I mean, I think that what you are describing, this thing of like, you can go a certain way in higher education in your field and arrive at the idea that that the math can do it. The math does the job. But as you said, you took this weird detour into political philosophy where any, fledgling PhD can tell you like, oh, no. We're not mathing our way out of, democracy. And like, I have these two, this wife and husband, mathematician, politician, political science duo, John Patty and Elizabeth Penn. I had them on the show, and they wrote this book that basically shows mathematically you can't arrive at a perfect consensus for everybody, and instead you can have legitimacy is all you can have. All you can have is a good system that everybody agrees is trying its best, and they're not going to win all the time, but you can believe in the system. And that's basically all you can hope for in democracy is their whole thesis. And they make people crazy with that thesis. Because
people want a very simple, and I worry about that. So, and the other, just to make it even more philosophical, it's not even just whether we can, it's whether we should. Because what does it mean for us to arrive at a world in which everybody agrees on everything? That is a world absolutely devoid of people who push the envelope, people who think differently, people who have diverse perspectives, people who have different preferences, right? Like, so like, yeah, sure, we can arrive at that world, but realize it is a world of pure homogeneity, which by the way, that is kind of a concern I have about algorithms. And especially as I think through like social media, that algorithms nudge us to the median response of things. So the median response, as I'm going to oversimplify this, like the median response as determined by certain data points about us that like stick us in like this bucket, right? So for me, it'd be like women who like particular things, who live in a particular part of the country, have an age, like all the kind of marketing-y kinds of things. But then that's really concerning, right? Because if it's also a self-fulfilling prophecy. If I'm only given content that they think will appeal to me, that is my definition of the world. And therefore I will choose from that set of things. And this has just been like a classic recommender system problem, but that is the only answer because the purpose of algorithms is to choose. just to like put a finer point on why that matters. So when as governments are trying to write policy, like the Digital Services Act is a really, really interesting law. The DSA was passed by the EU government about like 3 years ago, I think, and already is in effect, where it impacts very large online platforms like social media companies, et cetera. And there are these certain things that the companies have to demonstrate that, for example, their algorithms don't, undermine or otherwise subvert or change democratic processes. And I worked with the EU government on some. It's like, how do you audit Facebook's hundreds of algorithms to determine whether or not this is true? And one of the things I brought up is fundamentally, by having an algorithm, you are changing the process of democracy
Hmm.
because the purpose of this algorithm is to cultivate, to curate content based on some sort of a formula. And that formula, by definition, is going to be imperfect because, as
Hmm.
you've just said, there is no such thing as like perfectly mapping somebody's preferences onto a formula. So like, and then it kind of ends up in this weird conundrum. But then also, like, you don't want to get bogged down in that philosophy too much. Like, the other half of my brain, the quantitative analytical part of my brain, absolutely understands why it drives engineers up a wall when we start to get too rabbit holey with this stuff because they're like,
Right.
look, I don't need a perfect answer, but I need an answer because what's worse is a world in which we're not trying to make good solutions towards this.
Right. Which is why those papers begin, paper like that begins like, you can't do this, but if you were going to,
But if you were
let's just keep
to
moving, keep
try,
it moving forward here. That's exactly right.
right, right. Well, one thing that quantitative social science has that actually I think computer science doesn't in how we write papers, right? And I've definitely noticed this. So CS people, when they write papers, are like, this is the amazing thing I did. Here's this amazing stuff. I'm so great. Aren't I smart? Here are my answers. And I'm telling you, and then quantitative social science, or like any social science, you start off by listing all of your assumptions and all of the ways in which you are
Right.
wrong.
You're
Right. So
apologizing, going into it
yeah, kind of.
apologizing.
You're
Right.
starting off by saying like, I appreciate I have no idea how to map the political preferences of
Right.
every person in the United States. And that paper sort of started off reading that way. It's like, look, by the way, it's impossible to do this. And here's like all the assumptions we made to try to get there. But like if you were to try, here's how you would like think around the shape of the problem. And why I like that is like you've pointed out things for other people to fix. And like I
Right.
love that because that's a starting point. You're like, okay, like here's like kind of the shape of a problem or a solution. And like here, like I'm going to hand over to you all the ways in which this is not great, and then you can maybe start tackling one of those problems versus coming in and saying this is the bestest technology ever and
And
it's
we can
solving
ship
all the
this
problems.
quarter. Yeah,
Yes,
that's
because
right.
we have found universal truth. My
Hmm.
goodness, everybody from Plato onwards has struggled. But you know what? This like 21-year-old CS grad, they figured it
He's
out.
got
They
it.
figured
Push
it
it.
out.
He can put.
We've
He can go
got it.
ahead. Yeah, ship it. That's right. That's right.
Throw Rawls in the trash, throw all the philosophers in the trash. Like
That's
they don't
right.
know. They didn't know. They
Okay,
didn't
so
have Python.
right, right, exactly. So, Ron, I mean, I got to ask you, like, given what you were saying to me and the attitude you're bringing, I don't understand how you made it through your years at Accenture and Twitter and the rest, right? You were inside places that desperately want a quantitative solution to this, want a thing that they can show. I mean, I'm speaking for these places that I've never worked, right? But actionable conclusions is, certainly the name of the game with a place like Accenture. And then I'm really curious about this transition to Twitter. So you came onto my radar at Accenture first, and I had just published my book about how AI is going to mutate all of our choices. And I was like, oh wow, here's someone who's going to I can absolutely speak to you about this. And then you went to Twitter, and you had to basically go quiet for a while as you started to do your work there. And before I knew it, Twitter was over. So I'm there's a whole blank spot of your biography that I really want to know about, and I don't know the degree to which you can tell me about it now. But tell me a little bit about Accenture. I don't know if we need to get into it, but I'd really like to hear about your time at Twitter and what that
Yeah.
was about, and then what it was like to, why you then had to move on.
Yeah, yeah. Honestly, like I love a challenge. And I think, we can talk about all the ethical principles we want, and it is the rare person who not only has the responsibility but the opportunity to
Mm.
actually make that happen, right? So like what even is responsible AI? I don't, like I don't know. And we can again, this is going back to like the we can forever fall into a rabbit hole of like philosophy while other people go and build things that burn the world down. Or you could actually throw down and jump into the fray and say, actually, I'm going to try to make this better. So I think things that I loved about Accenture is, I had been a data science manager. I'd been a data scientist for some years at that point, and I was good at like building products. And Accenture really taught me how to think really big, like think at scale. Like this
Mm,
is not just like I'm making a feature to add to your app. This is like people from India to Belgium are going to use this. How do we design it so that it's better, right? Just like to think at that scale. It also allowed me to basically go all over the world, and I will forever be appreciative of that. It's just meet people all around the world who are working on these problems and learn how their perspectives on it are totally different, sometimes driven by culture. Like,
mm,
and even like translating over to the work I do with humane intelligence, we did a whole project with different ASEAN governments. So it was led by Singapore, 9 different Asian countries, and like the assumptions people make about what biases are were all challenged in that. And it was amazing to be given the opportunity to learn about how the world thinks about this technology that is fundamentally technology, but fundamentally cultural and social and political.
mm.
And that sort of scratched like a particular itch, like literally like the right kind of itch. And then also again to like have to make this into something people will use because we can aspire to a particular world, but again, like it is pretty rare to be given the opportunity or the challenge to say, well, now build it and make it something that people are going to want and need and use, given all the constraints, right? So, and that was also, when I came into Twitter. So when I had a startup in between, and actually I sold startup to
Mm.
Twitter. Um, and the reason I said yes to Twitter was I actually asked a lot about where this role would be situated in the company. And while there are like really great researchers at a lot of these companies, like I needed to be in product. Like I had to like stick my hands into like the guts of the
Mm.
machine.
And that's
And
because just to be clear to people who don't know, right? Product like rules the day. It's one thing to
yeah, I
be a
mean,
sort of
like
abstract thinker somewhere else, but if you're in product, you are part of the machine. You get to be.
that's right.
It's the center of power in a way.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And in the least charitable interpretation of why tech companies hire these people to write basically they hire academics is to give the veneer that they're really tackling these hard problems when in
Sure.
reality they're paying somebody an incredibly big paycheck to give them plausible deniability while product teams go and build product. And
Right.
we've heard this grumbling from other responsible AI teams, right? So Tim Gabriel's team at Google and others like said that they were sidelined by product teams because you have
Hmm.
to ask permission to be in that room. Now, that was not my role at Twitter. At Twitter, I was an engineering director, and I was on this team called Cortex. And Cortex was, as the name sort of like implies, is the machine learning and AI brain of the company. It was the part of the company that provided these services. So, like, why is that important? Well, because structurally, I have to ask permission to be in the room where things are built. Like, those are my peers, and my job is to work with my peers. That is literally my job description. I don't have to say, I wrote this paper. Like, will you implement it? Like, I am there to say, hi, I'm here to ensure that like your algorithms are being built fairly, ethically. And again, like I love like resolving these challenges. So, engineers want to do things a particular way. They want things that are programmable. They want things that are like a little bit more clear. So how do I take these concepts and like things that we want, like equity or whatever, and drive it into things that are something we can tangibly build? And that was fun until it
I
lasted.
was going to say, so for people listening to you must be like, wait, at Twitter, at the company that
Yeah,
Elon
this
Musk
is
owns?
right. Twitter, not X, two totally different
Right.
companies.
So this is 2021, 2022. This is before he
Yep,
shows up.
that's right. That's right.
Mm,
Everything. This
mm,
is also during COVID, which is really, really funny. My entire team and I still chat with my team a lot. We all have a little signal group and we chatter a bit. And those of us who live in New York actually meet up every once in a while. Actually,
mm,
just had a dinner 2 weeks ago. We're going to go leaf peeping in a few weeks. But we had only ever actually met once in person because it was during
mm.
COVID, and my entire team was built remotely. Honestly like if he had not taken over, I'd probably still be there. It was such an amazing opportunity. I think the thing that really got me was, social media more so than really almost any other product company. I guess now with the big Gen AI companies because they sell to individuals and not businesses, right? When you build something that like regular people interact with, and again, especially on social media, ooh, it's like a rush. Like you get that feedback right away. People are
Mm.
telling you immediately, and especially on social media because they can find your handle and tell you what they think. And there is something about having that level of impact and the responsibility that that puts on you to really understand like what this technology is capable of. And
Mm.
that was such a phenomenal. And Accenture was great for different reasons, but I never got to interact with people using the
Right.
technology. It was just business to business.
Hmm.
Totally different
That's funny.
ballgame.
I very much I relate. I'm just being in broadcast journalism and before that in publishing. Yeah, the rush was like somebody I know used to say we play with live ammo, and there's that feeling that you're when you do the thing you do, it is absolutely inviting enormous feedback, and it is
Yep.
I was not by any means having the kind of effect on people on a day-to-day basis that you were, but it's the same flavor of just like input output.
Right.
It is a powerful thing. And there's that feeling. I mean, there's a feeling of, I remember speaking to a one of many, many, many academics who'd been pulled out of academia by one of these big companies where they do a brilliant job of, I think, recruiting people away from public academic centers and into
I
these
mean,
private
they do a
corporations.
brilliant job of paying people a ton of
That's
money.
right. That's right. And in his case, what he said was, I said, well, do you think you'll ever go back to academia? And he was like, no, no way. And I was like, why is
No, I
that?
mean,
And he's,
honestly, like
yeah,
this is not this is no judgment on them. Academics are paid abysmally and given a
yeah,
ton of
terrible.
work to do and a lot of bureaucracy. Like,
Totally. Exactly. Well, this is what he said. He said, I never have to go through an institutional review board again, which is these boards that academics have to
yeah,
go through to get permission to do human research or anything else. I get paid really well. All the top minds in my field are like down the hall, and I can get on their
yep,
calendar, no problem. And this is the big one. He said, he's like, I can get like millions of people's data a day. I can push,
yep.
I can get out I can experiment on people in a way. He didn't quite say experiment on people, but he was like,
But
but the vibe
that's what
was,
happens.
yeah, that was the vibe. And I was like, I would imagine that must feel really amazing to have that opportunity. So,
Yeah.
but then Musk arrived, and that was the end of your time.
Yeah, that was the end of my time and about like half the company. Actually, nobody knows how many people at the end of the day left Twitter. And why do I mean nobody knows? Well, 'cause he laid off, I think, about half the company that was left. And Twitter had stopped even sharing the numbers of people who were leaving before he even joined. I actually wrote an entire op-ed in The Atlantic about how it was just, and it seems kind of prescient today, actually, given not just like his impact on the US government, but Doge and Trump and everything, just how fragile culture is.
Hmm.
And, I loved being at Twitter. Twitter still had the mentality and vibe of like a 2010s, like Knott's early 2010s startup, while still operating at scale. I think, like for some people it was too chaotic. Like I kind of loved it. I loved it
Hmm.
for the chaos. It was never a very big company. I think at its biggest while I was there was about 8,000 people, which is like tiny considering the next like people would put like Twitter and Facebook kind of in the same category. Facebook had
Right.
over 100,000 employees. We had
Right.
less than 10,000,
Right. Right.
which is kind of crazy, right?
And I remember
Um,
hearing from people who were working there at the time that there really was this feeling of like, we are the media through which, military enemies are communicating diplomatically, and through which people get the announcement that their block is about to burn down in a wildfire and they've got to evacuate, and that we are
yep.
responsible for that, and we take that responsibility seriously. There was a sort of a publisher's mentality in a way, or what I would consider a publisher's mentality in a way. It felt like there was mission there beyond just we're going to grow as big as we possibly can.
Absolutely. I think there was a shared understanding. A lot of people at Twitter really, really cared about what they did and they appreciated the gravity of the task at hand. And in part, I think because if I'm going to speculate, it's actually because the way Twitter really entered the public psyche was as part of the what was it, 2009. Uh, uh, my goodness, I'm like so jet lagged. My brain is blanking.
I know, I know. I pulled you off a
Uh,
plane. You're
no,
playing out
no,
of
it's
Europe.
fine.
Yeah.
As a part of political protest in 2000, interestingly, like now we're talking about that again in Southeast Asia with the Gen Z protests using TikTok. Like we were the social media of Arab Spring, and I
Mm.
think that mentality, and also Twitter took trust and safety pretty seriously. And I think there was also this mentality of like we're trying and sometimes we screw up, and I kind of liked that. So one of the reasons I ended up joining Twitter. So when I was interviewing was when they had that whole debacle with the image cropping algorithm and skin tone, where sort of the Twitter citizen data scientists were finding that the image cropping algorithm, that whenever you put a photo, would automatically crop the photo to some sort of like preferential part of it that would fit in the dimensions, tended to cut out darker skin faces, tended to
Mm.
put in lighter skin faces, tended to crop women differently from men, like women at their chest and men at their face. And what I loved was that Twitter leadership hopped right into Twitter and they're like, tell us about what's going on. And
Mm,
actively engaged and actually made promises and actually followed through on those promises. And it was quite refreshing. And that was almost like responsible AI, or people's awareness of biases in AI was like near peak at that time. People were really getting it. And, Twitter was a place everybody talked about it. And it was, not, it was frankly like bold of Twitter
mm,
leadership to hop in and say, hey, tell us about what you're seeing. Because most companies would have just, thrown up walls and, had some sort of PR firm make a nicely worded answer on behalf of Jack Dorsey. Instead, you had Parag, and I think at the time it was one of our like well-known product leads hopping in and just talking to regular people about
mm,
what they saw and how they did it.
mm. From those heady ethical days to the weird AI slop moment we are in, we're going to talk further with Rumman about how far we have come, maybe how far we have fallen. We'll be right back. I can't quite imagine what it is like now to look back on, the era when your CEO would like leap into the public to talk about a mistake the company made. Now we're in this world of like here's the thing I want to get your feedback on is Sora. So at the time of recording this, Monday, October 6th, OpenAI has just released this Sora ability to basically put out 10-second AI-generated TikTok-ready clips. And already my social media feed is full of, Martin Luther King is a DJ, and it was Jesus and the Apostles giving you a restaurant review, and it's just clearly like we're going to be awash in that stuff. And to think how far, I just wonder what your reaction is, considering like, I can't imagine what it is what problem OpenAI thinks they are solving with that product. What's worthwhile about building that, and to think that you came from a place like Twitter at a time when you were doing like, public research about the bias of the algorithm, and your CEO was actively engaged in dealing with the fallout from that. I don't know. Give me a sense of how you think about where we're at now.
Yeah, I actually was just having this conversation with someone this morning. Well, first of all, like the audacity of it to just literally, and as you mentioned, you've mentioned like public figures, right? Like deeply respected public figures. There's also like all the copyright infringement. They haven't even bothered. They're like, yeah, you know what,
Right. They're not
copyright.
going to the King, the Dr. King estate.
No, they're definitely not going
No.
to Dr. King estate. They're definitely not going to Disney or, like whoever makes The Simpsons and, whoever to say like, hey, we want permission. Actually, what they're like, again, the audacity of it, they're sending a blanket message and yeah, you can opt out. Like you
Mm,
can decide to opt out. So
mm-hmm,
they're not even pretending, which is truly, it's just astonishing. It is
mm,
like it is astounding the audacity of it. So there's that. And the second part is actually the part of the conversation I was having was with someone who does trust and safety and information integrity. And I was reading an article about this morning as well, where I'm like, wow, they're just completely changing the paradigm of information integrity, right? Information integrity specifically is a term we use for people who work on things like trust and safety, like the arm of all of these companies that's really focused on ensuring you have truthful data that is, that to the best of our ability, it's scientifically accurate. So, for example, during COVID, Twitter had an entire like team of people focus on identifying COVID mis and disinformation, right? All of that effort, they're like, yeah, no, it's cool. And they're doing it by almost flipping the narrative on its head and saying, well, everything here is fake. And that was the article I
right.
was reading where they're like, well, everything here is fake. So
That's right.
in like this person was arguing they have a sense of relief knowing that it's all fake. But
Yeah,
what is so terrible.
I agree with you. I put this rant out on TikTok about it just to say like, what the F is going on? Why would they do this? And a couple of people, most people were like, oh my God,
Yeah,
I agree with you. But a couple of people were like, everything's fake anyway. And at
yeah,
least they're letting us see that. They're revealing to us that that's the case. And I just think, wow, like like the idea that it just reminds me of like early days of interviewing people back before
Yeah.
back when Meta was Facebook. I would interview people there, and it was just clear that the attitude was that there's no difference between, would I kill myself through an editorial standards department and a team of lawyers to get onto the Today Show or Nightly News or whatever, and some random kid in his basement, that there's no actual difference between those two things in terms of its value in society other than what the market decides. And so you just hear these folks basically with this libertarian notion that like, well, the market's going to tell society what information is important, right?
Not the
And that's what it
market.
feels like to me now is like, this is this accelerationist thing where they're just like, burn it all down and the
Yeah.
market will determine what remains. And that'll
Not
be
the
how
market, those markets that have always proven true to determining equitable outcomes, those
Yeah.
markets.
Yeah, they're always improving life.
Because we've never needed programs to ensure that the market just doesn't like bulldoze over the most vulnerable and the ones who need
Right.
it. That's never happened in the history. Yeah, no, I agree. I feel like sometimes I worry that we've over-indexed on making people aware. Like I was talking a bit about the time where like all of us were like banging this drum and raising awareness. And I worry that it's gone a little too far. Not that like I'm not making an anti-cancel culture argument. What I'm saying is we have scared people too much without giving them methods of remedy. We have not shown that there's a path forward, that they have any agency. And that's what leads to this kind of nihilistic viewpoint of like, well, it's all screwed anyway, so who cares? Set the house on fire, right? So I think part of that is tied to this like this overly negative attitude about tech that can be quite disempowering. And again, it's the disempowering part that I'm focused on, not the pointing out the flaws. We should point out the flaws because these guys sit here and they accumulate more and more wealth. And I'm also often surprised at how much people don't know. Like when I say I think the most evil person in the world is Peter Thiel, like I truly do mean that. I think he's an evil, like he's like cartoon supervillain level evil, like Stan Lee would draw him and you would just take from his life and make a comic book. And people are like, I'm like, no, really, this man wants to rule the world. And they're like, no. And I'm like, no, really. Like, look up Praxis. Like they write you convenient PDFs about how evil they are. How do you not know, right? That these people are out here. I mean, he's on this whole tour about the Antichrist right now. Like, what? And like these people are some of them are actually evil and they want bad things for the world. And I'm not putting those words in their mouths. They say those things.
Right. And believe that it'll be received well somehow by the right people. I know. It's a funny, it is
I
the
just think they
cognitive
don't
dissonance of it is.
care.
Yeah, I guess that's
I
right.
just think they don't care. I think a select few people got very, very lucky in the early days of the internet, and they made a lot of money, and then money compounds money. And I think they conflate, and also we as a public tend to conflate wealth with intelligence, and that's kind of how we've gotten the Elon Musks and the Peter Thiels of the world and Mark Andreessens of the world.
When I was first trying to figure out what I was going to call this podcast, and at one point I thought it was going to be much more sort of specifically tech focused, and I was really despairing about exactly the thing you're describing, and I was going to call it NPC for anyone who doesn't know. Non-player character, it means background actor, basically in like video games, and because I had just heard people talk about like there are the people who count and the people who don't. Typically they were talking about it in a company, but more and more you could just sense that people really, believe that just only a certain handful of people count, and everybody else is kind of, just an extra in the plot.
I mean, maybe a particular, like to continue this sort of vein of nihilism is maybe that's how it was for a long time, and I think maybe the past few decades have actually been quite different from the way things have usually been, right? I mean, people talk about the broligarchs today and they're the robber barons of yesteryear. Well, yesteryear was not that long ago, right? We still have the descendants of these people rolling around. And again, just even take it like, because I always see tech as a microcosm and actually sometimes a leading indicator of like how the rest of culture will go. We take a step back, you're like, we're in this era of like Nepo babies and, sort of drowning in nostalgia culture to the extent that there's like very few new and original things being released. People have talked about the death of music for over a decade now, right? So we are kind of living in a time where a lot of people think that and a lot of it's also tied to accessibility and income and money. Like I live in New York City, and one of the constant conversations for a very long time has been the expense of living here. But now you're actually seeing it play out in like the lack of a creative class, right? The lack of like the young struggling artist or the old struggling artist, right? Who is like this brilliant person who makes amazing art, but can actually afford to live here and take advantage of all that. I think maybe like what we're talking about is something that has existed for a while, something that's been happening for a while. And tech is just one way where it's manifesting just so physically. Again, going back to like Sora, what is it? You ask like, what is it for? And I'm like, nothing. It's for nothing. It's for no reason
Hmm.
and nothing.
Hmm.
It is, I cannot even think of a positive reason for it. It is pure entertainment, like in like the Wall-E, like I always worry people are like, oh, what are we heading towards? 1984, Brave New World. I'm like, we're heading towards Wall-E.
Yeah,
We're going to
Wally
be
is
these
what I
like
think of. Idiocracy is the one
right?
I
This
use. Hmm.
Idiocracy, Wall-E, where we're just going to sit on these screens eating our Doritos while AI generated stuff, is like put in front of our faces and everything is burning around us.
Right, right, exactly. So you said a moment ago that you think that the sort of the despair around tech is causing people to be, am I understanding you correctly, sort of disempowered, and you want them to have a sense of how to come back more. And I would love to hear more about that. My book is called The Loop: How AI is Creating a World Without Choices and How to Fight Back. And I will confess to you here that the
The
How to Fight
fighting
Back
back part was
part
the
is
hard
it's
part.
real thin. It's a thin part of the book, because
Yeah.
it's my remedy has been we should just sue the bejesus out of these companies, and that we're going to need a huge number of new legal precedents. We're going to need a huge amount of
Yep.
new legal theory in order to make that happen, and that's as far as I get. But I'm always asked, what should people do at home? What can people at home do?
Yeah, yeah.
And
And that's always such a great, and like I love when people ask that because they're seeking that empowerment. At least they ask that
mhm.
question, right? Well, I'm gonna give you a slightly long-winded answer because
Go,
some of it actually
please.
dates back to my time at Twitter, right? So,
Mm,
when I was at Twitter, Jack had gone in front of Congress and said something about this idea of algorithmic choice, which is like an app store for algorithms, right? And the idea was like anybody can come and sort of pick an algorithm aligned with their values. And it's kind of like it's a very noble idea with like many, many problems, but like and and to be honest, like nobody inside the company wanted to touch it with a 10-foot pole
mm,
because
mm.
it was just rife with like ooh all the issues. I'm like we'll try it. Like let
Choose
me
your
take a
own
stab at it.
bubble sounds
Yeah,
tough to me.
kind
Yeah.
of, right? So like yes, right? So the
Hmm.
first part is like, oh, so you're actually telling people to subscribe to a filter bubble. But like the idea, like I understand the noble intention of the idea. It's like to give people agency and choice versus saying, I, Twitter, even me, Ramon, like I get to dictate to you what ethical is. I get to say, what is good and bad and what your feed ought to look like. It's very like nanny state. It's very paternalistic. So how can we give people a bit of agency in like making smart, informed decisions? So like, if I'm take a charitable perspective, I'm like, let's say that's what we want to aspire to. And I know it's not possible. I know there's all these ways it's going to fall apart, right? Not just the like, oh, I'm just feeding people filter bubbles. Well, 100% tell you that the most organized coalitions around building those algorithms would be the far right. Like Breitbart would be the first to show up,
Hmm.
like, here's my algorithm,
Hmm.
and then they'd sue the pants off of Twitter if we said no to hosting the algorithm, right? But like all that aside, like the idea is noble. So the first thing we did was try to do some user research on like, do people even understand what algorithmic choice means and what does it mean to them? Everybody loved the idea of being able to choose algorithms aligned with your values. Not a single person could tell you what it really meant or what it would even look like. So I think there's that dissonance here. Like we know very vaguely what we don't want and maybe kind of what we do want, but actually most of the time we don't know what we actually want. But even if we did, we have no idea how we'd get there. So
Hmm.
um like fast forward some years, like that's actually what I've been working on with like Humane Intelligence, which started off as a nonprofit. We have a nonprofit now. I have a corporation that does it, a public benefit corporation. And I gave a TED talk last year about this, about the right to repair. And I purposely chose a paradigm or a phrase that has been in tech for now almost 30 years. This idea that if you have a piece of technology or a piece of technology is in your life, you have the right to do things to it, to modify it, to alter it, to fix it. And it is traditionally applied to things like, and I kid you not, McDonald's soft serve ice cream machines, or like cars is a great example, right? But now, like, what does it mean for that to apply to algorithms? Like, what does it mean if I have the right to say, this is how ChatGPT should be interacting with me. And these are the things that I want to see when I do it. And, like, and I'm not going to give you the entire TED talk, 'cause I actually do kind of lay out what does that mean to give people agency. Part of it is teaching them that they're allowed to have agency. And the other part is having legal protections for people who would do that, who would do this kind of work independently. And then the last part is actually building the thing. And, often people challenge the building the thing part. And I'm like, yeah, why do they get to say we're going to populate Mars and I can't even say we're going to make algorithms that are designed to give you what you want to see? Like,
Mm,
yeah, sure, it's audacious. Why not? Right? Like, yeah,
that is so
exactly. It
interesting.
is.
Right. There's a book that had a big impression on me. I was just looking to see if I have it here, called Exit, Voice, and Loyalty by an economist named Alberto Hirschman. And he basically said that any good functioning company or civic institution or government needs to give its constituents those three choices. You can walk away, exit, speak up and change the system, voice, or just stick around, don't worry about it. That's loyalty. And my argument has always been that we have lost that
Yes.
that that the middle one. We've lost voice, and in
Mhm.
some cases you've lost exit. It's not
You've
possible to,
absolutely lost. I mean, we lost
right?
exit in the social media era. I mean, when the news first came out about Facebook shadow accounts, where you didn't even have to have a Facebook account for them to know who you were and track information
Mm,
about you, we 100% we have lost that. I was talking to somebody earlier today about the illusion of choice, where the options we are given are don't have the thing or have the thing exactly on my terms.
that's
When
right.
like
That's the
I am
terms
not
of
going to
service
budge.
thing, right?
Exactly,
That's
the end
you
user
don't get to
license agreement.
you don't get to
No,
call up
you don't
Tim
get to
Cook and be like,
negotiate
I'd
it.
like it a little different than this.
Right,
You use the
right,
phone or
right.
don't. That's right.
Right. Although I will say Apple of all the companies have introduced, well, is a great example is, how Apple introduced these features, user features, where you can tell the app not to track, right? And it's so
Yeah.
fascinating because, and there's also like, I'm not going to pretend, Apple is this 100% benevolent company only looking out for the good of people. There's all sorts of reasons Apple did this. But I thought it was super interesting that a long held belief in tech was they called it the privacy paradox, where everybody said they wanted privacy, like data
Right.
privacy and data security, but then they would always just like they wouldn't do anything about it.
Right.
And then
Or
my answer always,
one
right,
a Facebook
we
guy
never gave
said
them
to
a way
me,
to do it.
yeah, a Facebook guy said to me, they want privacy, but they want tailored ads. They don't want ads that are irrelevant to them. Which
Correct. So,
I
right,
was like,
right, exactly. But then Apple introduces Ask App Not to Track. And then all of a
mm,
sudden, every company is scrambling to figure out new methods of revenue because
mm,
once you've given people, and this is the thing, you have to give them, you have to meet them where they are and give them the ability to take action and have agency and a choice. Like Apple's, and because Apple is brilliant at design, right? They're brilliant at user experience. They're like, oh, we're just going to make this a pop up that comes up whenever you install a new app. And on a per app basis, you could say, I don't want this app to track. Because
mm,
I guess in contrast to, the person at Facebook, well, maybe I actually do want tailored, discounts on whatever, like flights, because I fly a lot. And I'm okay with United Airlines having information about me. But I'm actually not okay with like my workout app having that information because why does
mm,
my workout app need to know where I am and what other information apps have about me? Like, what a great way to give
mm.
people granular choice in a really, really simple way. And I think it kind of goes under discussed, like the impact that that actually had on the ads revenue market because it was just it's been an absolute free for all, but actually that design choice and that super easy little thing pivoted in a way. And
Mm.
and again, like I don't think users realize that they were actually suddenly given this agency over their data.
Do you, as a result, are you then going into the boardrooms of companies and saying you should also make a design choice like this? It again feels like it's the largesse of the company that makes that
Mhm.
possible. It's not grandma at home who gets to make that call.
Right. In some cases, yes, I do a lot of strategy consulting work, a lot of AI governance work. And there's a paper I had published like during my time at Accenture, actually, which was about how companies can institute responsible AI practices, right? And we interviewed about 30 to 40 people, and it was, the current state of things, the aspirational, like where do you want it to go and where do you think it's heading? And I feel pretty validated by the book that you had just mentioned because like two of those choices. One was, and this was about your employees at your company. And how do you build a good responsible AI practice? One was toned from the top, like leadership should, really say this is important to us, but then back that up with a bunch of other stuff. Second
Hmm.
was anonymous channels to raise issues. So I guess this is your like
Mm.
have a voice part of things,
Right.
right? And whistleblowing, whistleblower protection is part of it, but also just internally. And then a third part was incentivizing people to even do this work. So, and like I'm gonna be a rational choice, like social scientist for a second, and say even if we were to boil everything down to like utility functions and maximizing utility, which economists do, and I understand why, that then you would say, okay, well, if I want this company to build responsibly, if I want people in this company to care about building responsibly, I have to incentivize them to do it. And right now, the structure of how these products are built does not incentivize you to do that, right?
Right.
It's like build at all costs. Like, why are you being the squeaky wheel? Why are you raising your hand? Don't ask too many questions, right? So if you truly care, and there are actually ways that don't necessarily slow down product build for you to be able to do that work, and that's kind of the sweet spot.
Mm-hmm. When we come back, we're going to revisit an oldie but goodie in Rumman's work, which was a look at how right-wing voices are amplified on the internet. And I'm going to ask her whether that is still true today and what is the prospect in the future for that continuing to be true. We'll be right back. Back when you were at Twitter, you put out this very widely cited paper, Algorithmic Implication of Politics on Twitter. And you analyzed in it millions of tweets from elected officials, from media figures across 7 countries. And you got into a lot of controversy when you revealed in that paper that, surprise, systemic amplification bias was favoring the political right, where we've heard for years and years and years and years from people on the right that their voices are being silenced. Your paper found the opposite to be true. I would love to hear a little bit about. So I guess what I want to say is, first of all, am I characterizing that right? And then where have we gone since then? Like where are we, like in this world in which you're seeing, tech leaders, Tim Cook handing a big golden statue to Trump and tech leaders.
Sorry, I think you meant Tim Apple.
What did I say? Tim Cook? Tim Apple?
No. You said Trump once called him Tim Apple.
Oh, did he? Oh, I didn't hear that.
This was like the first Trump administration. He called him Tim Apple.
Yeah, Tim Apple. So Tim Apple giving Trump his big golden statue. You're seeing,
oh God, with his hands like shaking while he did it.
Yeah, Mark Zuckerberg, saying that Trump standing after his assassination attempt and pumping his fist was one of the coolest things he's ever seen. The fawning of the leadership toward the right. Tell me where we're at. Tell me about those conclusions that you drew way back when, and have those continue to be true? Like, where are we at now with that?
Yeah. So, gosh, I didn't even know about that Mark Zuckerberg thing. We said I thought you were going to talk about that dinner.
Yeah, the dinner where all the tech CEOs get together and fawn over Trump. That's right.
Oh goodness,
yep.
God. Imagine being some of the most powerful people in the world and still kissing someone's ass.
I know. Or
right? I'm like, don't you have enough money to not do this? Like, I don't,
right? YouTube could win in court no problem, but instead chose to settle for like a tiny, what for them is a tiny amount of money. I'm sure just they look at the risk and reward and say, that's worth paying the toll. Don't worry about it. But so this issue of right-wing voices
algorithmic amplification. Yeah. So I always have to launch into like the construct of the research that the team did and, what this specifically means about the conclusion. Because I think one of the purposes of doing this research back to like agency and, people wanting to know is to figure out what to do about it, right? It's not just to point out that there's problems. And again, like I was actually in a position where I had the privilege and the opportunity to do something about it, not just point out the problems. And also, again, it was a responsibility because a lot of academics studied Twitter, especially at that time. Twitter was really generous with what they call the fire hose, like all the data that they would give, worked extensively with academics. There's a lot of research on social media companies, which, by the way, you don't see anymore because
nobody's
Elon Musk
sharing that data anymore. That's right.
Elon Musk charges $50,000 a month, and it used to basically be free for academics. And B, God forbid your research not align with what he wants to see. He has sued organizations out of existence, literally out of existence, for saying things or exercising their right to exit and walk away. So like that's actually why I don't see a lot of this kind of research anymore, let alone from the inside, or even from the outside. So, it's a responsibility if you're on the inside to say, I can actually influence how these things are being built and actually talk to the teams and go in. And I have this insider information that no one else is going to have. So what the team did was look at 8 different countries and compare the reverse chronological algorithm. So that's like the feed that just shows everything in order backwards, in time order backwards, and the quote algorithmic feed. And we debated over, like, I hate calling it that because reverse chronological order is an algorithmic choice. It's a very simple algorithm of timestamp, right? But that is also, and this is back to when I said, the by definition algorithms are shaping because it has to make a decision, however imperfect. So a lot of people said they liked reverse chronological better because they thought it, quote, introduced less bias. I think what they really meant was like it was a bias they could understand, which is
Mm.
time-based bias, right? In other words, I am more likely to see posts from where I live than posts from Asia because of the literal time lag, right, between these two places. Um, so, but we did find that in 7 out of 8 countries, that there was a preference for center right content on the algorithmic feed. So,
Mm.
like, and the paper goes into how we even define center right, because it's like that is also quite fraught. It's sort of making assumptions on what counts as a left and a right opinion, that kind of thing. So it goes into all of that. But what's more important is the conclusion, right? So I think the wrong conclusion a lot of people have is like, oh my God, that means Twitter was biased. Actually, it doesn't necessarily mean that. What it means is, as a result of the algorithm, the output that you had did have a bias to it. Now, where does that bias come from? There is the concept of, quote, algorithmic bias, which would mean that there is something inherent in this formula, in this algorithm, or in like the data it's being fed that's leading it to say right wing content is somehow more preferable to people. That is one potential hypothesis. Another hypothesis, which is actually my leading hypothesis, unfortunately, is that what an algorithm does by definition is it's surfacing content that people are interacting with. And the shorthand for it is like what people, quote, want to see. But I think a better way of saying it is what people are interacting with. And I make that distinction for a very good reason. We often interact with things we don't want to see. We're interacting with things to say that
Right.
it's bad or I hate it or you posted to be snarky about it. So we're not actually saying I want to see it. What I'm saying, I want to see less of it. But I'm doing that paradoxically by pointing attention to it. And that's interaction. But what any algorithm, no matter what the algorithm is unless it is explicitly somehow told to do this differently, it's using this interaction as a method of assessing how salient the information, how important the
Mm.
information is, and surfacing that. So the data from that is also important to know where the data comes from. It is from April to August of 20, 2020, which
Mm.
means that it was right before the Trump Biden election. And it was peak sort of Trump pushing a lot of right wing content. It was also in Hungary, right? And a lot of European countries were sort of shifting right at that time. So people were interacting with a lot more right wing content. So here's, it's like riddle me this, Batman. What do we do when the purpose of an algorithm is to surface what people are interacting with, and what people are interacting with is right wing content? Well,
Mm.
then we have to have this policy decision where somebody gets to play God and say this is good and that is bad and this is
Right.
fair and that's not fair. And this is what I've challenged a lot of people on. I'm like, okay, let's say we agree and this is awful the way it is. You tell me what right is. Tell me what good is. Is it 50-50?
Mm.
Is it 50% Democratic content, 50% Republican? And then this goes back to like being able to full circle what you said at the very beginning about identifying universal values, or this idea of a universal spectrum of political beliefs. There's no such thing. It doesn't exist. And
Mm.
I'll give you a really simple way it doesn't exist. The US is one of the few countries in which we still debate the concept of climate change, in which climate change is in any way, shape, or form controversial. In just about every other country in the world, there's full acknowledgement that climate change is real. Nobody's having scientific debates on whether it's happening or not. They're like, oh, what do we do? And so if we were just to define this by a political spectrum, whose political spectrum? The one in
Mm.
Germany where they fully agree like, that climate change is real and what they debate on is the spectrum of approaches, or the one in the US where we still get to say things like, well, why is winter so cold if there's still climate change, right? There is no universality to this. So kind of a complex answer, but I love that paper because it forces you to look at what the problem really is, which is by definition, these algorithms are imperfect and they're making choices for us. How do we define whether or not we want them to be making these choices?
Mm. It is such a can of worms because, so now, I mean, I think you would agree with me, right? We have not gotten better at this issue. We have not solved this issue in the years since you published that paper, it seems to me, right? I mean, we're Elon Musk, right, is clearly putting his thumb on the scale for the output of his chatbot Grok, such that when, for every so often, it'll just like bubble up weird conspiracy theory stuff, as non sequiturs. You'll ask it for, the best way to prepare a turkey for Thanksgiving. It'll tell you about the plight of white South
White
Africans, right?
genocide.
Yeah, white genocide, right? Like so it doesn't feel to me like we have moved more in that, that we've solved that problem, other than that people have become more nihilistic about it.
Yeah.
No one is
Well, and
saying,
also, and
yeah,
this is my frustration with only philosophically admiring the problem or only pointing out the flaws and not giving people a path forward, however imperfect, because absent that, we have what we have now, which is Elon Musk gets to do a 6-month campaign where he bashes leadership at Twitter for doing all the things, allegedly doing all the things that he himself is very clearly doing right now,
yeah,
right? Where
right.
he has said so one of the most dangerous things he has said is that he wants to redefine what truth is by deciding what goes into his AI model Grok and what doesn't go into Grok, right? So he gets to decide white genocide is more important than the Trail of Tears, or, we're not going to talk about the civil rights movement because that's over and in the past. But like, we should definitely talk about what happened to Charlie Kirk because that's absolutely a travesty in humanity, right?
Mm.
And it like, so again, like one of the concerns I have about constantly admiring the problem or pointing out the flaws or quote raising awareness is like that has to have follow through, and absent follow through, you kind of become a part of the game, right? You become a part of their ambition. So one of the worst things I see now is trotting out of people, a lot of whom are like me, right, who work in this field as this like public, like they get to flay you publicly, but then behind closed doors, these companies go and they just go build what they're going to build. So there's a moment given for people to be very in the spotlight and in the media and very quote publicly like, holding them publicly accountable. But then the reality is they go back and build what they want to build.
Mm.
And that's the most dangerous paradigm that we're seeing manifest today.
It reminds me a little bit of the weird PR tactic of taking the worst case scenario and making it part of the marketing of generative AI products. There's a lot of that where they'll say, oh yeah, no, it's going to destroy a lot of jobs, or
Yep.
yeah, boy, it says things that I'm really disturbed by, and as if somehow that winds up sounding like you're, as a result, sort of boasting about the impact of your product more than
Right.
trying to come up with something. So if we're gonna not do that, and as someone who admires the problem for a living, I would really love an answer to this. What should I be doing instead? Like, what do we do rather than just roll around in how terrible this stuff is, even if we aren't qualified academically to like you say, like if you asked me to write the rules by which media, by which an algorithm chooses what I see, I'm sure I would make a hash of it. But I also would rather I'd rather have a shot at that. And I have no idea how I get from where I'm at right now, where it's accept the terms of service or don't, to a place in which, like, what does it even look like if we get to the place that you would like us to go? What do we have choice? Do we get to choose our bubble? What does it look like?
Right now, we're actually in this really weird spot where it doesn't seem like we have choice. We have more choice than we're ever going to. Like, the amount of choice we have is constantly decreasing. So right now, let's say with Sora, you can just not use it. You can just not engage with it. And I say this like in practice. Like, I actually pretty much disengaged from social media about 3 years ago. I've been like playing with TikTok, and as much as I love TikTok, I feel like there is such a huge investment in like getting a video up there. And actually, I actually do find that there's interesting redeeming communities on TikTok that I actually kind of
I
like.
have been weirdly, I weirdly love TikTok. The community that I get there of people who want to talk about this stuff is weirdly redeeming, very
Yeah,
thoughtful,
yeah.
sensitive, not abusive. I mean, I'm a white dude and I get a whole different treatment than other people do, but it is for some reason, it's been great for me. And it's just in this moment. I have no doubt that
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
going
yeah.
to change in another
No,
year.
I agree. And maybe we're at the tail end of like social media, double-edged sword, right? Because I felt like that about Twitter. But I think one of the things I found pretty disappointing, and maybe it's just because it had to do with Twitter, is like when Elon Musk took over Twitter, everybody talked a big game, but very few people left. And I was actually surprised at how
Hmm.
few people left. I'm like, do you need clout that badly? Like, and people would say things like, well, where is the community going to go? I don't know, man. The community goes wherever you go because you're the
Mm,
community. It's not this like abstract notion, like you are the community, right? So you actually have this choice to go elsewhere, and make this on another social media platform. I think people are sort of trying to do it on Blue Sky kind of poorly. I don't know. Like Blue
I
Sky,
know.
this
It
does not
feels like
work.
there's a dozen people there. It's tough that
Well,
way.
my problem with Blue Sky is it feels too much like Twitter 2015. And
Yeah.
everyone's like, it's sort of like, you were the captain of the high school football team, so you have to regale everybody with your stories of like when you made the like the final touchdown or whatever.
Yeah.
Like all of Blue Sky kind of feels like it's a bunch of like elder millennials like me reliving the glory days. Like, hey, do you remember 30 to 40 feral hogs? Remember? Yeah, dude, it was really funny, and we're never gonna have that again. Like, I'm
Right.
sorry. Or it's gonna exist in like a very different way. And like it actually exists on TikTok more than it exists anywhere else. It for
Mm,
sure does not exist on X. But it was disappointing to me, like how people don't realize that you just don't have to have the thing. And I say
right.
this again as like I was a Twitter power. I was on Twitter all the time. It was how I interacted with the world. I literally worked there. And after he took over, I just like something broke and I have this different relationship with social media now. And I look at it, and I just don't like it anymore. And
Yeah.
I feel like in a sense almost weirdly validated because of Sora and the direction it's heading in. I'm like, no, this isn't heading anywhere good. I think when
Mm,
I was at Twitter, I would, and even afterwards, I would have definitely said, like, I completely understand all the bad things social media is bringing into the world, but it has to be balanced by all the good it's bringing, the ability to elevate minority voices, etc. We have none of that anymore. We have none of
mm.
that. All of the good we even argued social media had does not exist on traditional social media platforms. So like step one is I think like just carefully assess whether you even need the technology, right? Like we don't actually need to have an Alexa. We don't actually really need to have like a Ring doorbell. I'd also say like go beyond the superficial and see what options exist. You would be surprised at, for example, if you don't want a Ring doorbell and you don't want like Amazon and selling like giving all of your neighborhood video information to cops, which they literally do, there are actually companies that let you locally host your own data. So
Mm.
you can still have all the benefits. And yeah, you're like, yes, it will not be as easy as like plug and play Ring camera, but it's pretty good. So just like the other day, my partner installed a Raspberry Pi ad blocker, and you can just sit there and like it's not that hard to do. And maybe it's a little bit more work, and it requires a little bit more elbow grease, but it's like it's kind of like a hobbyist thing to do, and it's not super complicated. So like, don't just go for the thing that is like top of the charts and in the media and what everybody's going for, right? Like find out what other options are because there probably are other options. There are communities of people who are really interested in protecting data and still having good technology. Give those people your money,
Hmm.
right? And like truly, because they probably have like a Kickstarter campaign, or or maybe they're just on like some sort of niche like Adafruit website, or maybe they're part of a maker community. And they're going to
Hmm.
be a little bit harder to find because they don't have hundreds of millions of dollars of advertising budget to shove the technology down your throat, right? But go and like and find it's actually enjoyable to go and like God forbid you interact with a human every once in a while. It's kind of cool.
I love this. I love the idea that maybe if enough of us take it upon ourselves to do that, to like deal with the friction and do that, it shows there's a market and somebody makes suddenly that really
Yeah.
sexy, and suddenly we have a whole new cultural paradigm that we can all
There you go.
lean
So
into.
one of my favorite articles, it's really shaped me as a person, as a leader of teams, like in general in life, is an article by Rebecca Solnit called "When the Hero is the Problem." And in it, and she is brilliant, like everything she says is absolute genius. And she talks about how she constantly wants to write about collectives, movements, and the pushback she gets is like, well, who's the hero? Like, who's the guy that wins the day? And
Hmm.
she points out that most of the changes we have made in history was never like one person. It was there could have been a person who was a figurehead, but also because our narratives want somebody, so we pull somebody out to decide they're the figurehead. But even like if you learned about the civil rights movement, like I did as a child, I had the great fortune of having amazing teachers who taught us all about it. It's not just like Dr. Martin Luther King and the March on Washington, and that's it. We got civil rights. Like there were so many people and so many movements and so much complexity across a massive spectrum of people, right? You had everybody from the Black Panthers who introduced school lunch programs, right, to the people who were among the civil rights community, thought that they were too extreme and wanted to be more nonviolent. Like it's such complexity. And her point is that change never happens because one person gets up and is like, I'm just going to go do this myself. And she talks about how the hero narrative is dangerous because it
Mm.
makes us lazy. It says, oh, well, Greta Thunberg's out there, on behalf
She'll
of the
take care of it.
Palestinians. She's good. Like, she's our hero. Like, yeah, Greta, I'm going to go and talk about how great she is on social media and then, like, job done. But
Mm.
wow, like, why are Palestinians still dying, right? Like, things like that. So it has really shaped, like, I push back on this narrative that we don't have agency. And I don't claim it's easy, but nothing good was ever easy.
I love that. I think that's great. More agency. Rumman Chowdhury, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. What a great conversation.
The Rip Current is produced and created by me, Jacob Ward. And if you liked this show and you want more content like this, go to theripcurrent.com, where I publish a weekly newsletter that covers these same sorts of stories of the big invisible forces that have us all in their grip. And if you want to really do me a favor, if you could go to where you have listened to this or watched it and like it, share it, or even better, review it. Holy cow, is that helpful? It's the best possible way for me to find a new audience. I really appreciate you being here. Thanks for listening.